This is the Business Storytelling Show, a top global marketing podcast listened to in more than 100 countries, live streamed on social media, and Christoph Trapp chats with industry leaders to help your company tell better business stories. Here's today's episode.
Hey, business storytellers, how's everyone doing? Welcome back to episode 711. Oh my goodness, we're really cranking up the heat here before the holiday, before everybody just disappears and enjoys the end of the year. And about today's guest, I want to just mention really quickly Brian Monschein. He owns Narrative Insights.com. You can check out the website right there. And he's such a good sport because I just noticed that I'm wearing a New York Yankees hat, and he has not given me a hard time about it at all, even though he likes, I don't know what team he even likes, something in Boston. I don't remember their name. But anyway, we're going to talk about how do we use better storytelling when it comes to research results, getting stakeholder buy-in, but then most importantly, how do we use all that information to create better stories, to sell more products, to get the company name out there. It starts with storytelling at the front end. So 711 is on the way here. Brian, welcome to the show. Hold on. We have to make that full screen. Oh my goodness.
He's no longer a Red Sox, but I had to show my bobblehead off.
Yeah. All right. Enough of the baseball talk, I guess. I just noticed that you're such a good sport. And of course, we've worked on and off together over the years at Vox Pop Me, and you had your own podcast at one point, and just a fantastic guest to share insights. So really appreciate you coming on. Now, talk to me about when it comes to research, though. Why is storytelling, I don't know, maybe storytelling is a little bit of a buzzword currently, or maybe not, or why are we talking about it today that it's so important?
I mean, yeah, I would agree it's a buzzword, but especially in research, I use storytelling all the time. And, the main reason, if you think about it, market research, consumer insights, whatever you want to call it, it's a lot of numbers, right? It's just tons and tons of data. And a lot of times, insights get lost because they're not telling the story the right way. They're just showing a bunch of data and it just gets overlooked. So I think storytelling and research is critical, honestly, because that's really what makes or breaks all the work you do on all these projects. So I've made it a part of my day-to-day. I'm always trying to find creative ways to tell a story with data. So yeah, it may be a buzzword and we do hear about it a lot, but I think especially in research, that's really what makes you stand out.
Sometimes you get so hung up in what you're doing, right? So I even see it for myself. I do a podcast and now I'm talking about the very specific thing that I do to produce the podcast. But most people don't really care about all those things, right? So, but is it the same thing for a researcher? They pull all this data together. So of course they will want to show you all the data because that's literally what they just spend time on.
Yeah.
Is that part of the reason why that's happening?
I think so. I think, I liken it to, say you're making a movie. Think about all the people that are involved behind the scenes to make a movie. You've got your sound guy, your director, your producers, your actors. But the viewer doesn't see all that. They see the end result of that amazing picture and how the story comes together. That's kind of what research is. There's a ton of stuff going on in the background. You've got, if it's qualitative work where you're doing focus groups, you've got moderator guides that are, it's basically a form of a script that a moderator is following, or you've got surveys and all the questions and the links from one question to the next. All that stuff is great as a researcher to know, but your audience doesn't need to see that. They need to see a finished product that's polished, that's actionable, that can really point you to a direction of how to guide your decision-making. There's a lot behind the scenes, but you don't need to see that. So yeah, again, if you think of storytelling, that's where it all comes together. You take all that hard work, and it could be, weeks of work and collecting information and talking to thousands of consumers out there. Net result, give me that one nugget, that one insight that's going to say, okay, I know what I need to do. I know I can launch this product, or I can launch this new ad, or whatever it may be. So yeah, I think there's a lot of things out there that when you see the finished product, there's a ton of work that went behind that, but you don't need to see all that. You just want to see the end result.
I know there's many one-person teams, and I mean, even for this show, I'm the one-person everything, right? Producer, editor, scheduler, everything, right? But I'm sure that exists in the market research area too. But how do people get feedback on things? How do people get? How do they collaborate? I'll give you an example. I love to take pride in me using the right terminology, right? Or using the right examples. And I was using this example without going into too much detail. And somebody said to me, this one word is literally creating the opposite effect of what you're trying to accomplish.
Interesting.
Right? And they said, because like, I know what you're trying to say, but it's just like it has another meaning, and most people will take that meaning as opposed to how you are trying to use it. I would have never gotten there without somebody else spotting me literally saying that in a thing, in a conversation or wherever. And then they were like, this is, and like, yes, it is. You're 100% correct, but I would have never gotten there. How important is it to get like the right people looking at your storytelling, and how do you get people to do that? And how do you get the right people? I mean, not everybody can do that either.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And it's even more appropriate for me because, like yourself, I'm a one-man team here. So Narrative Insights is one person strong, and I've been doing this for a few years now. And so I don't have like a formal review process where I can get feedback from people on, what's working or not working. I don't have a boss that's going to be meeting with me quarterly to do that. That was my old world back in the corporate world. So now I use, I work with a lot of different clients in the role that I'm in now, where I do research consulting, and I make sure to always ask for feedback. The way I see it, I am never going to be perfect. It's kind of like playing golf. You can play for your entire life, but you are never going to master that unless you're Tiger Woods, and even he didn't master it. So I'm always evolving. So I think for me, it's listening, and there's a big difference there. Listening and hearing, really listening for, okay, what's that feedback that they're giving me, and how do I use that and make myself better? So I do that a lot with the clients I work with. I always try to ask after projects are finished, okay, what worked? What didn't work? Where are the opportunities for improvement? And I make sure to use that. So right now I'm actually going through the process of thinking through 2025 goals for my consultancy. What do I want to do? I'm going back and I'm looking at all that feedback, and I'm making sure that I understand what I did well. I got to keep doing that. And then what can I do better? So because storytelling is so important in the presenting that I do, it's always good for me to have that, I call it a postmortem, after the fact meeting with, my main stakeholder, and just learn, all right, what worked, what didn't work, what can we do better? So yeah, constant involvement is huge for me. I think everybody should do that. I just, because I don't have a process in place, a formal process, I like a review process, doesn't mean that I can't do it. I just have to be a little bit more creative with it.
The one thing that I'm a big fan of, Brian, is in the moment feedback, right? So for example, I mean, I know this is not a feedback show where we critique each other or whatever, but like if I were to do something and you would be like, Christoph, why did you just say that? Why did you do that? Why, you know what I mean? Like, you literally remember what you did because you just did it. And whether you agree or not is irrelevant, but now you can build on that because you actually remember. But sometimes when people give feedback, and I mean, this is why, and we don't do this at GrowGetter or anywhere really that I've worked recently. When people give feedback in like a performance review, like 6 months after the fact, and you're like, I don't even remember what you're talking about. It's completely useless. But let's talk about a little bit here. What makes a good story when you share results? I mean, I know we always talk about, you got to know your audience, you got to do these different things. In theory, if you're only presenting to a couple people, that should be easier than me doing a podcast to, a few thousand, because they're all over the place. But is it, or is it not?
I think there's advantages and disadvantages. So, in terms of your audience, I miss in-person presenting, first of all, because that was what I did all the time. It was in a conference room with a whole group of people. Now it is a little harder to present on Zoom calls, because either you have people that are video off, and I'm a big proponent of reading the room, looking at body language, just seeing if people are engaged, because if not, I got to redirect. So there's certainly something to be said about who you're presenting to, and really watching their cues to know how you can do better. So yeah, that's a big part of it. It's like, yeah, I present often, and I'm always trying to think of a creative way to present the information. So I've done things where, I try to avoid just a standard PowerPoint. So I've done things where we've had interactive workshops where we make it really engaging, have some breakouts or whatever to really bring the data to life. We've done this with segmentations before, where we have people kind of mimic, okay, this is your segment. You're the value seeker in the restaurant industry. So how would that person act? Where would they go? How much money would they spend? We can really infuse somebody into like real life scenarios. It does things that you're never going to do by just showing PowerPoint with a bunch of charts and data in it. So I think it's really just about getting creative in how you show the information. I love the idea of thinking about it like a customer journey. So I can show you data points of somebody who uses a restaurant app and then goes into the restaurant to pick up their food. And I could give you numbers and you'd be like, oh, okay, I think I understand. But if I told you the journey that one of your actual consumers took when they went into the store and all the pain points that they ran into during the process, you're really going to see it now. So it's like, you really just got to think through like, all right, take your marketing hat off, put your consumer hat on, think like a consumer. We're all consumers. How would you react if you were the consumer in this situation? And I think that's where the engagement from the audience comes into play, where you really, you go beyond just reading headlines from a PowerPoint and you actually almost try to embed them within the scenario of what's happening, what you're trying to get across.
I agree with the PowerPoint thing so much that when in the days when I literally still flew around the world giving presentations and keynotes, I stopped giving PowerPoints because I'm like, who wants to look at a PowerPoint? Unless I had to show something that didn't make sense if I was just talking about it. But I would never have a slide that would be like, had the bullets that I'm talking about. Do you know what I mean? It's like I would just talk about them, and if there was something that needed to be visual. Now, the one thing I miss traveling a little bit, but I actually like these kind of things better because I don't. I mean, you're pretty tall. I mean, we met in person before. I mean, but a lot of people are a lot shorter than me, right? I mean, I'm like
Yeah,
6'3", 260 pounds. And here we are all the same size. So nobody focuses on, oh my goodness, he is so huge. He's so big, and here we're all the same size. So from that perspective, I really like this interaction. Plus, I can talk to a lot more people, right? Because I mean, you're
sure.
in on the East Coast, I'm in the middle of the country, and I talk to people from all over the place. But let's talk about the audience feedback for a second. The first time I gave a talk over Skype, believe it or not, many, many years ago, I couldn't see anybody. It was
Yep.
horrible. I'm like, how do so how important is it to get the feedback and get the look at the body language? And then how do people even read it correctly? Because I know there's a lot of studies out there that most people can't really read every body language cue correctly anyway. So how do you, maybe not, I don't know how many, but how do people do that? How do they look for the right things? How do they adjust what they're talking about?
I mean, you could very quickly notice somebody on video starting to stray. They're looking down. They're obviously looking at their phone. There's a lot more distraction when you're on a Zoom call and that person is at home or in another office somewhere. So I watch the eyes. If the eyes aren't on me, then I know I'm probably not doing a good enough job. Because if I'm doing a good job, you're engaged and you're like, it's almost like the lean back versus lean in. If you're not leaning in, I know I'm doing something wrong. And then, when you've got multiple people on one of these, online presentations, there's a priority of people that you're probably paying closer attention to. So if you got somebody in the C-suite, well, yeah, you better make sure you're doing a good job. And, there's going to be certain people that you're going to make sure they're on your main screen. So you can keep a close eye on, if they're paying attention. It's tough though. People go video off, and it's a much harder thing to do. That's where I try to engage people by asking questions. So I'll lob some questions out there like, all right, let's stop here. Let's assess what you've heard so far. Tell me, what you've understood so far, and let's talk about this a little bit. How can we use this in our marketing or strat plan? I think that forces people to be more involved. There's nothing worse than sitting in on a presentation and as an audience member, and you don't have to say one word. You just sit there and listen to them talk the whole time. I make these a two-way street. I want to make sure that we're having natural breaks within the conversation and really just talking versus just listening to me. Nobody wants to listen to me for an hour talk because it's going to get boring at some point. So I think just making sure that you got things built in where you're watching certain folks and then you're also engaging with them. That to me makes a more interesting presentation.
Absolutely. I mean, getting people to come on camera, that is actually harder than it sounds. Now, one thing, once you are on camera, I want to show this to you. This is the camera I use. So in case you're wondering, Brian, I am literally looking you in the digital eyeballs, right? Because the camera is right there. Your picture is right behind it. So I'm looking at you while I'm looking at you, right? But it also looks like it. So this kind of camera is kind of a new thing out there. The eye level cameras that I like to
That's smart.
I like to use.
Yeah.
Very, very cool system. Now, but how do you get people to come back on, right? I mean, I think that's so hard, especially with executives. They all think they can do whatever they want to, right? Or and maybe they can, but how do you engage people? Like small group discussions on Zoom? Have you tried that before? Or what tips do you have when it comes to getting people to come back?
Yeah. You could straight up just ask them like, hey, listen, and I'll even give them a heads up. Like I'll even put it in the invite sometimes, like would really appreciate everyone to be camera on. So that way they can prepare. I get it. Sometimes you woke up and you went right to the gym and then you had to jump right on a call when you got back and you're not ready to go on camera. Totally understand that. But if I'm giving you a week's notice, listen, this is going to be an engaging conversation. We want to make sure that we've got everybody all in on this because this is going to, it's going to have an impact on where we go as a brand. And usually people are pretty good about that. I think there's other things you can do though. Like I try to learn from other industries. I even read some books of comedians of how they engage an audience, and they do it really well because they have certain tactics that they're using to keep that audience really on them the whole time. So if you think about it, like when a comedian is up there, they know how to build tension, and it keeps the audience almost on the edge of their seat. Like, what's that punchline going to be? If they tell the story just right, it really makes people lean in and want to watch. They add color to the characters that they're talking about. That really helps humanize it. And then the commentary throughout, sometimes they'll even engage with the audience. Like this is where I talk about evolving. Like you have to get out of sometimes even the business world to really think through, like, what are some things that you can do that are different that, people who present, and, comedians technically do that. They just do it in a very different way. They're doing it to, engage an audience. What can you learn from that? So it's things like that I try to do to really just come at it from a different angle. Don't think of it as a typical business presentation. Think of it as you're really just trying to create as much engagement as possible, and you have to use little bits of a lot of different things to keep that successful. And by no means am I a master at this, but it's at least something that I've tried to get better at year after year, just from learning from different things.
Yeah, and it is practice. I mean, I think one of the things you mentioned earlier is it's going to be hard to be perfect. And you know what? I've given up on being perfect. I mean, I'm not perfect at any of the things I do, but I just keep going and going and going, and it gets better and better. Somebody said to me, "Oh, this podcast is so well produced," and I said, "Well, thank you, but we're also 700 some episodes into it, right? Let's go back to episode 2 and 3 and 4.
That's a good exercise.
They were not well produced at all. They were
Yeah.
just like me on the phone." Now, one thing, maybe the last 3 or 4 minutes here, we can talk about this topic is I like to say, you have to bring the sizzle and the steak. And I think a lot of researchers are really, really good at bringing the steak, right? Here's the stuff we need to know, but it's not sizzling. So how do you find that right mix of being entertaining, being engaging, and presenting stuff that people want to know? And like, how do you learn to do that, or can you?
I think sometimes when researchers bring too much sizzle, they almost get off the mark of what the original objective was. So you got to be careful with that. I always have a project brief that I start with when I do any research project. And I make sure that we're fully aligned on the objectives. What do we need to get out of this? And what's our success criteria? What are those measures that we really want to look at? Okay, I've got that nailed in the presentation. I know I will hit that, and I will hit every one of those objectives. I'll even start the presentation with, as a reminder, here is exactly what we wanted to do with this research and what we wanted to get out of it. So to me, it's like, that's part of the sizzle, because you got to make sure you hit the mark of what was, the original intention. The rest is almost filler. Then you try to throw some jokes in there to keep it, relatable and, funny and, kind of lighten the mood a little bit. Sometimes research can be, it can get really intense and boring and numbers oriented, and you could just lose people. So you got to break it up sometimes. I've seen some really good people in marketing that do this really well. They can tell a story. They can have some laughs in between. I think it's just little things like that. You just have to look at it like, if you're just like sitting in a bar with somebody having a conversation and you want them to be engaged throughout, what would you do? Just implement some of those things throughout the process here. And it's worked for me pretty well. Again, just like you, Christoph, I'm not mastering anything. I just try to get better. If I can do that every quarter, every year, if I look back and be like, you know what, this is definitely better than what I used to do 3 years ago, then I'm happy.
I think what the biggest problem is with the sizzle on the steak is, how do you tie it back to what you're actually doing, right? So for example, there's been times when my communication coach at the time said to me, "Oh, that's a really good story, but what the heck does it have to do with what you're talking about?"
Yeah.
It got people involved, but it was like didn't have anything to do with anything. It was just, I could have said, "Oh, it's snowing in Iowa and I'm cold." You know what I mean? Like,
Yep.
how do you find the right way to engage people? If you have any quick tips on that.
Yeah. You know what? I think it's probably a list of tricks that you want to have in your bag. You know, I like to rehearse, not by a script, but I do like to rehearse a few times beforehand. Sometimes I'll even put my wife through it and, just say, "Hey, listen, just sit down for 20 minutes. Let me take you through this, what I want to present." And she'll give me some good feedback. She's actually in research too. So that's an advantage for me because I can talk about things related to data and she understands it. And she'll be like, "This is good, but interject something here." Or maybe, that joke would work perfect here. So I think it's little things that you just try to hone your craft. It's like when you think of comedians from my prior example, I read Jerry Seinfeld's book, and he used to go and he'd do appearances over and over and over again, like 7 days a week. And sometimes within the bit he was telling, he would change one word and he'd see a better reaction from the audience. Boom, I nailed it. He was so known for making sure that you get it just right. The delivery is perfect. And it's just rehearsing and you go over it a few times and you'll get it.
I mean, see, that's kind of interesting. That's kind of what I mentioned earlier. One little word made a huge difference. Crazy how that happens. Brian, really nice to see you. Great to see all the great, awesome things you're doing out there. Really quickly, who should reach out to you? How do they contact you?
So in terms of reaching out to me, I work with brands as more of a fractional insights advisor, coming in and helping them with research. I've led insights departments for those brands as well. But I also work with research agencies. So if they are really looking to build their client base, I can come in and help with my network. How to reach me? Look me up on LinkedIn. I'm very active. I'm posting almost on a daily basis. Or check out narrativeinsights.com.
Awesome. Nice to see you, and we're out.
Thanks for tuning in. Please rate and review the Business Storytelling Show on your favorite podcast platform, and subscribe so you don't miss